To set the scene, I suppose, from Saturday, as I said, 42-27 to France. 8-6 at half-time to the French after Louis Bilbire's try in the corner. Ireland only having 2 penalties to show for what was a very dominant opening quarter where they had plenty of territory in possession but couldn't make it count really on the scoreboard. The big moment in the first half was obviously Antoine Dupont's injury. That became a big talking point after the game with Fabien Galthie's comments accusing Tyburn and Andrew Porter of deliberately targeting him. Ultimately, he left the field with an ACL injury, is facing a lengthy spell on the sidelines. And then the second half, Dan Sheehan crosses early on. It looks like the momentum is all with Ireland. And then over the course of 15 minutes, France unleashed a devastating barrage, 24 points unanswered, 3 tries and a penalty from Ramos. You know, an unbelievable score from Bilbire mixed in there. So by the hour mark, the game was basically done. Damien Penaud kind of putting the cherry on top with the breakaway try to equal Serge Blanco's try-scoring record for France. And while Ireland did hit back with 2 late tries to, I suppose, narrow the gap on the scoreboard, it was well and truly done with plenty of time left on the clock. So that means the Six Nations is in France's hands. If they beat Scotland on the final day, they will win their second title in the Galtier era. And for Ireland, Rud, plenty to mull over and lots to discuss. We might just go first to what exactly happened after that Dan Sheehan try between kind of minutes 44 and 59, because I was at the game with my dad and I turned to him, not the best analysis in the world after the game, and said, oh, France are done. They're on the rack. Ireland have them exactly where they want them. I felt that way at the time. And then, as I said, 15 minutes later, you could have actually headed for the door and wouldn't have missed much. Such was the devastation France wrought. What do you put that down to? What exactly changed? What happened? What do you think went wrong for Ireland?
I think that's what they'll be looking at right now in the review room as they go through. They pick through it. I think they'll focus in on 2 areas. The first 20 minutes when they didn't get the scores on the board that their play probably merited, or that certainly their possession and territory merited. But they'll then, I asked one of the players after the game, which will you focus on more? And he said that 30 minutes or that 20 minutes after the Dan Sheehan try. Because you're right, Ireland, Simon Easterby said it on the record, they felt like they'd broken France. And maybe they relaxed a little bit because they're so used to once they get on top. No, they don't usually relax. Usually they double down. Usually they go for the jugular. Ultimately, it came down to Irish mistakes from the Irish side. Look, we should credit France and say that some of their play was magnificent. They obviously, the 7-1 bench helped. They played over and through France, and then when they went through Ireland and went around them, they had the pace and the devastating finishing ability that Ireland lacked all day. But there was a Gibson Park box kick, invited France into the game. Obviously, that puts Ireland on the back foot. Calvin Nash goes high. The second time in 2 weeks, Ireland have had a card for a high tackle, which they kind of cut out of their game for a long time. Other teams were getting high tackles against Ireland. You know, Ireland missed Gary Ringrose in this game because he went high last week 2 weeks ago against Wales. And then Calvin Nash, there was a small bit of bad luck involved, in my opinion, in that tackle. But at the same time, he gave the referee a decision to make. And then a big refereeing call goes against them. They get, France do unbelievable, it's a succession of really high power carries, really good offloading that leads to the Budahan try. But when it was reviewed, I think most people in the stadium expected it to be ruled out by Angus Gardner, who reviewed it and took the view that Peter O'Mahony had matadored his way out of a ruck and Thibaut Clermont's collision, which cleared the space for Grow to go through, hadn't had a material effect, which I personally think is a bad call. And I'm sure Ireland kind of said afterwards they felt that both the Nash yellow card was a bad call and also that the Disciplinary try was a bad call. But at the same time, they're supposed to be a team, having worked with Gary Keegan over the years, who are able to park bad moments, regather themselves, and basically play what's in front of them. But if it didn't feel like they were able to do that this time, whatever happened under the posts, they came back out, and from then on in, they didn't win a collision. France, both teams rolled off their benches. Ireland rolled off Conan and Baird at the same time that France rolled off four forwards. But Conan and Baird did everything on the back foot because everything was going against them. An unbelievable counter ruck on the right hand side, and Bilbire scores his chip on try, and then Ireland are 2 scores back, and they're not really built for chasing games. They start trying to play in their own half. Both Pendergast and Osborne make big mistakes, and the game is gone essentially at that stage. So France won the game in that period. But what Ireland have to do, and what we, I suppose, as an Irish focused podcast have to do, is review what happened with Ireland. I think mentally that double whammy took the wind out of their sails, and from then on, physically they just weren't able to get back to the pitch that they needed to get to, that they were at for the first 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's funny. After the first try from Budahunt, or the first try in the second half from France, Ireland actually responded pretty well. Hugo Keenan claimed a really good high kick. Prendergast put a nice kick into the 22 to pin France back. But then Luku had an unbelievable clearance. And then around that time was when the counter ruck happened. And
Gibson Park takes the clearance.
The unbelievable finish between Penno and Beale-Beret. And it was after that try that the performance substantially dipped. I actually thought Ireland responded pretty well up to that point, albeit it was only a couple of minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Ian, obviously, Rudd touched on a couple of things there, and we will circle back to the opening 20 minutes in a moment and just how Ireland, or why they didn't get to make their dominance pay. But what stood out to you about that kind of period where France really upped it, took control of the game? What did you see from Ireland that you weren't happy about necessarily, or what would you like to have seen them do better to manage that area to make sure France didn't pull away to such a degree?
Yeah, I think first off, just to lean in on the big refereeing decisions there, I think, look, to the letter of the law, which is what we want to follow. We want, clear guidance on the rules and to make it easier for referees. The head contact with Nash, it is a yellow card, and I've said multiple times that rugby's trying to avoid head clashes, and until the rules are adjusted that the ball carrier has an onus on him to avoid head contact as well, we're going to continue to see these head clashes. And I thought that was the correct decision. It was, there's late movement. The way Barassi carries the ball, it's very awkward. Nash is thinking, is it a right shoulder tackle? Is it a left shoulder tackle? Ireland are under big pressure at the time, and the head contact comes, albeit it's passive. It's a very different tackle to the one that we saw Gary make the week before, where he's coming in with real force, and that's obviously why that resulted in a red card. I think around the breakdown, it's an incredibly difficult game to referee. You see the Clarkson penalty later on in the game. Clear release, like it's such a subjective rule. In theory, Clarkson has released. He's the assist tackler, but he has released, but it's not overly clear, and that's why Angus Gardner gives the penalty there. The Peter Mahoney one, like, rugby is a full contact sport. And the rule is, look, if it's outside a meter of the breakdown and the opposition made contact, which they did, it is a penalty. But it didn't quite look right. I know Andrew Trimble explained it well. I think Rudd has explained it well. There, Peter is moving back, but that doesn't mean that it's not a penalty. Like Matador at the breakdown, it is when a player is coming in to contest. It's not getting into a defensive position. You're allowed to move back there. But there was other big refereeing decisions that I thought that they missed. And to give context of why Ireland ran out of steam in the second half, we should have been far further ahead at half time. And I think back to the start of the game, the first maul that we have in the French 22, we're 5 meters out from their line. The maul's moving forward. It's looking really good. We've got the best, one of the best hookers in the world, and Shaun coming off the back. Dupont is the only player defending the blind side, and it's a 2-on-1 with Shaun and Gibson Park. The only way to stop it is to be offside, and Dupont is offside, and they spot the offside. But that is a penalty try and a yellow card in my book. It's cynical play, but because it's at the start of the game, and possibly because it's Dupont, they don't review it the way they would if that was in the 75th minute of a game. But that's 7 points for Ireland. We didn't score subsequently. Obviously, Doris gets held up, and that's a different talking point in itself. And then another huge play in that first half came on 37, 38 minutes when there's a bit of kick tennis. It's slightly scrappy, but look, we end up coming out of it on top. Osborne puts a kick in behind Penno. He goes back lackadaisically, thinks about kicking, decides to run. Osborne tackles him, and France are in a terrible spot. Every player is in front of Penno at the time, and Doris comes in, and it looks like it's going to be a turnover. And then, the ball ends up kind of trickling out into touch, and it just didn't look right. And quite often when you're watching a game live and it doesn't look right live, it isn't. And if you go through that replay, Doris is just about getting into possession of the ball, and Barassi comes in completely in the side of the breakdown and makes contact with him, and he loses the ball forward. That again is a penalty, and that would result in Ireland having a 5 meter line out. the likelihood of scoring there is huge. Like if Ireland were to score off both of those opportunities, the impact on the scoreboard is arguably 12 or 14 points. And the issue then why we run out of steam in the second half is because we've had to chase the game for the whole 80 minutes. Had we gone in at halftime, 14 points up, we're managing the game in a different way in the second half. France are going to be far more cagey. But that doesn't get away from the issues that Ireland also have. We saw the power that France have, the speed that they have, and they really did for that 20-minute period, blow us apart.
I take Ian's points, Rud, on maybe a couple of penalties Ireland would have got, but the way France defended Ireland, I don't know if it is a given that Ireland are getting a 7 or 14 points out of that, because the French defence going into the game was under the microscope a bit. I know it was discussed on Indo Sport last week that Shaun Edwards, the bounce he brought in the first couple of seasons, probably hadn't been as pronounced, but that was a real throwback to, reminded me of kind of Ireland-Wales in the millennium over a couple of years, where the French defence on the line was just, in the first half in particular.
It's not talked about a lot, but the amount of damage Shaun Edwards has done to Irish rugby over the years is incredible. And he went for the Ireland job in 2013, and like Joe Schmidt got it on merit. Like he was obviously the obvious choice. But in another world, Joe would have gone back to New Zealand, and Edwards could have been the Ireland coach.
Was he the fair to be the head coach of Ireland?
Himself, Ewan McKenzie, and Joe were the three candidates at that time. And look, I think it was a fairly foregone conclusion that Joe wanted it. He was going to get it. But he was Joe's bête noire for nearly a decade. Like, they never won in Cardiff, and so often it was that Welsh defence that thwarted them. But the French defence on Saturday was magnificent, and I think it was helped by the absence of Mac Hansen and James Lowe in particular. I don't think we'll see Ireland go into a game with Jamie Osborne on the wing again. Maybe I'm underestimating how much he can learn and develop, but I don't see him as a winger. I think if the injuries had happened earlier on the week, we might have seen Jacob Stockdale on the left wing and Nash on the right. But he doesn't look natural out there to me. And obviously, if you're up against someone like Biel Barret and Pinot, who are just two of the best wingers in the world, it was a struggle. And what Ireland asked their wingers to do generally is to come in and play make. And Prendergast had to do a lot of it on his own at the weekend. And it was very much a mixed bag, partly because of that, because his options weren't as good as they would have been had he had even just the outball of being able to sling it wide to Low and say, you do something, which is what Ireland have done so often in this tournament. They didn't cross kick, which I thought was a really strange call. Like, they had a height advantage on Biel Barret in particular, although he's bigger than you think. But they did win a couple of big aerial battles from box kicks, but they never, when they were in the kind of either in the 22 or whether maybe they didn't get on penalty advantage enough. But I didn't think they cross kicked enough. I thought that was going to be a tactic. They were very predictable, I thought, in their attack in the French 22. They had way more ball than they probably expected to have. France basically staffed the backfield really well so that Ireland couldn't play the strategic kicking game that they've played all tournament. And they haven't had so much ball all tournament. They've had a lower possession in all three of their wins. They had loads more possession on Saturday, and they lose the game because France said, you run it back. And we saw Prendergast get turned over running it back. We saw Nash get turned over running it back. We saw Osborne, I think, throw the ball into touch. So France, I think, won the tactical battle. France forced Ireland to play a game they didn't want to play. And then when they played it, they defended them really, really well. But Ireland missed a couple of their attacking weapons. Ringrose was a big loss as well. Furlong not having all tournament. I think we just saw that that Ireland's depth is not what some people think it is, that when you lose five kind of starters four starters in Ronan Kelleher, it's just not, the strength isn't there to go and beat a France, even though they went toe-to-toe for 45 minutes. So there's Ian would be able to explain the attack much better than I can, but to the kind of the untrained eye, the flow wasn't there. France looked very comfortable without the ball because Ireland didn't have the weapons to kind of to probe. I think Aki picking up that injury early on meant that they just didn't have one of their weapons to kind of tighten up the French defence, so they were comfortable enough. And the two times they made big inroads really was when Doris and Van der Fleer picked from the base and went through the ruck because France weren't staffing the ruck, and they found out. They never did it again. They did it twice in the first 2 minutes. They never tried that again, which I thought was a strange one.
Yeah, Ian, what's your perspective on, I suppose, that opening quarter when Ireland did have so much territory in possession, as Rudd said, probably to a surprising degree, and couldn't make it count? What did you see from the attack that you would have liked to have seen less of or more of?
Yeah, well, I think, like, touching on the point on Shaun Edwards, and like what particularly impressed me was he formulated a defence to take on the Irish attack as opposed to a system that works for, each and every team that you play against. It was specific in shutting down Ireland. And Ireland's lack of speed on the edges meant that France were happy to give the edges. They set up far more compact in the middle of the field. Even the first scrum of the game on the left-hand side, it's in around the 10-meter line. And, you know, Biel-Barré is inside the outside post as the fourth defender. And they were doing that intentionally. I think it was part of it was to help cover Barassi, who's been exposed defensively a couple of times. But they were happy to leave Ireland the edges, and then France would back their speed and get there. But on the higher phase count, France were coming so hard into the middle of the field with, you know, they've such big bodies there, and it created such an arm wrestle, gave us slow ruck ball. We weren't able to get momentum back into the game. And that ties into your point. Like, why didn't Ireland go closer to in around the breakdown? It's not really Gibson Park's game. You know, he moves the ball particularly well. And then as it frees up, maybe he'll start to probe then. But Dupont it would be more suited to that. The strategy for me going into the game was get the ball into the 13 channel and challenge Barassi as much as possible. And we did that really well. And the first thing was like, we did it once and it was Keenan, you know, shredded him, and we get in behind, and, you know, on another day, maybe we finish that. And as you touched on there, we go in around the breakdown and we're probing. But we just weren't able to keep that as part of our game plan. And that was largely down to the pressure that we were under. You can go in and around the ruck if you're getting quick ruck ball and moving forward. We weren't able to do that.
You know, some of the opportunities, obviously, you know, Prendergast hitting the post from a pretty straightforward penalty. Like, 3 points doesn't seem much in a game where you're ultimately we're down, 29 points.
That was huge.
But it was massive at the time. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, in the context, like, all these things happen in the context of the moments they're in, which is in the game was an arm wrestle in the first half. That would have been massive. Like, even Doris, you know, we've seen Ireland get held up quite a lot, and Leinster as well, you know, in a lot of moments. Like, Doris running at, I think it was Boudant and Aldred, like, into a double team like that doesn't seem the best strategic decision.
Even like they have a menu of 5-meter tap plays, but Sheehan almost got excited and tapped and went on the run, and he kind of hurled himself at the line, and for a second it looked like he'd make it, and he could, you know, he's well able to do it, but
jumped into the tackle as well.
But I think that was a lack of calm in a moment where, like, Ireland's strength. Right, we've talked about lack of pace in the edge, and they were getting outpowered. So what do you go back to? You go back to your menu of strike plays. So I don't think we saw very much from the Ireland's menu of strike plays in the game. We didn't see any really, certainly if they tried stuff, it didn't come off. But like, that's a game where you dust off the best 5-meter play you have, because you're not going to get that many opportunities to do it. Instead, they went, you know, Sheehan gets excited. The vice captain, the captain last week, gets excited, goes for it. And then Doris, I guess he has to take on what's in front of him. But at some point, you got to realise you're not going to get there, and you got to get the ball back. And it has happened very frequently. I mean, the most famous example is Ronan Kelleher getting held up off the back of that maul in the World Cup quarter final. But there was 2 in Scotland, if I'm not mistaken. There was 2 in this game, and it does happen. That's partly a symptom of the fact that Ireland, you know, do attack a lot and are in the opposition 22 a lot, and it is going, you know, it is going to happen, and they do back their goal line dropout plays to break teams. But again, they weren't able to execute on those either. So I don't know how much of what Ireland prepped in the week we got to see in the game, which is very rare for this Irish team. They generally, you will see off line out, off goal line dropouts off 5 meters. You'll see a lot of prescriptive stuff, because that's the way they don't have a Biel-Barré who can just make something out of nothing. They do have James Lowe, but he pulled out in the warm-up. But really, apart from Lowe and 1 or 2 others, Gibson Park, I guess, they don't have players who are going to create something for Magic. So they go back to what they've prepped. And I'm not sure how much we got to see of the stuff that would break them.
Yeah, and on that point, Rod, the lack of cohesion is down to delayed changes. You know, even Osborne moving from the right wing to the left wing. Like, you practice certain plays, certain line-out moves specifically from the right. In particular, you will practice scrum plays solely from the right. You'll have a different menu from the left because teams will defend a different way. So that affects the cohesion. Your timing is off. And Nash obviously coming in, having not been in the 23, that means that he would have had next to no reps in training during the week. Now, look, he's a good professional and he would have done his best to stay up to speed, but you cannot beat running the actual reps and, you know, the little small conversations that happen off the back of that. Look, I need you to be there a bit earlier, a bit later, a bit tighter, a bit wider. And that is the subtle adjustments that you make during the week that then have a big impact on the game at the weekend. And, you know, you touched on it already, like missing ring rows, you know, was a huge loss. That bit of extra speed at 13. He's a fantastic 13. And look, Robbie and Bundy both got through a huge amount of work. But that did affect things. Hansen, I don't know when he pulled out, like was it late in the week? Had he taken a lot of the reps earlier in the week? And that definitely had an effect. And you know, you think back into like what moments in the game did that really catch up on us? And it seems like a small one, but like when Mofana tackles Prendergast, you know, it's about maybe 5 meters inside the French 22, and he drives him back over the French 22. Such an energizing play for the French. Like they spoke up all week about targeting Prendergast, and the options outside Prendergast at the time was Nash and Peter O'Mahony on the edge, and we just didn't find our shape quick enough. And you know, had that been Nash with a full week of training, and he goes, look, just give me the ball in that instance, or it's James Lowe or Hansen where Prendergast knows just to give him the ball. You just ship it on. It's a 2-on-2 down the edge. Maybe you make something of it. Versus what actually happened, which was you know, really tough to watch and a big energizer for the French team.
Yeah, another one was Bielbire made a great tackle on Keane and kind of timed it perfectly as well. And as you say, those energizing defensive moments when Ireland were owning the ball and owning territory were huge. And you know, just to the point of the late withdrawals and the cohesion, like in being in the ground when it was emerging that Lowe wasn't playing, just the murmuring going around the ground, it was just the atmosphere kind of took a little bit of a dip when that was announced. Rudd, Sam Prendergast, obviously, you know, Ian touched on him there, you know, shipping that big tackle in the first half. How did you think he played generally?
He looked like a player who'd never played in a game like that before, and he looked like a player who was used to like that split second more. He could have done a quicker ball. He could have done with better options around them. But if we're saying that they lost the shape, well, he's there because he runs the game plan better than Jack Crowley. That's what we hear, and he's able to keep the team in shape better than Jack Crowley does, and he wasn't able to do that. I thought no one pushed more buttons and tried more things within the game to get Ireland to win the game. It was almost my main memory of Sam Prendergast within this game is him chasing down lost causes. Like he chased Dupont for the one that was disallowed. He chases Bielbire for the try he scored, and then he goes the entire distance of the pitch in vain to try and chase down when Ramos gives it to Pinot and Pinot scores the try. He pushed every button he had in his locker, and France had every answer pretty much. Some of his kicking was very good, some of it wasn't. You know, they recovered a couple of his contestables. Some of them were too long. That gave France a bit of energy as well. He
took a few balls into contact as well.
Yeah, but France had traps. Like there was one or two where I think he looked up and the backfield was staffed and he felt like he had to go. There was one or two where he definitely should have given the pass. There was an early one where he passed it to Beelum and Beelum wasn't expecting it, or Beelum certainly dropped it, but it was a very tight one and it just didn't work out. It was a tough day at the office for him, and I think if Aki hadn't picked up the injury, they might have looked at getting Crowley in there just to try and give the team a bit more energy and a bit of something different. But because Aki was struggling, they had to play with both of them, and there was parts of that worked. But you know, I don't think Ireland's plan was ever to get Aki off after 55 minutes. But yeah, it was a tough day for him.
Yeah, Bundy never felt right after that early, you know, knock when he was kind of getting treatment. He never really seemed to settle into the game after that. So it'll be interesting to know now. Subsequently, there'll be, I presume, an injury release maybe today. Would there be? And we might get a bit of
there should be
guidance. Maybe if he did pick up a knock. Ian, what was your perspective on Sam Prendergast's display?
Yeah, I think Rudd has summed it up well there. What was positive for me, the number of involvements he had. It wasn't like he had a poor performance and looked to pull himself out of the game. He was in the fight till the very end. And, you know, as Roy said, chasing Penno down, lost cause. But for the supporters in the stadium and people watching on TV, there's something you like about that. You're like, this guy is still fighting to the absolute death. He's clearly a really fit guy. To have put in 4 or 5 massive efforts, that wasn't something I knew with him. The biggest learning I think he'll take from the game is how he's got to manage his own energy better. And like some of those high kicks that he puts up, I think he's tired making those kicks. I thought he had to work really, really hard defensively. He's not necessarily in the tackle. Now they did target him when they got the opportunity, but he's doing a huge amount of running, going from edge to edge, and part of that is because we effectively had 2 12s in Ringrose and Bundy. So look, there's going to be huge learnings from Sam for this game. There were parts of his game that were good, like he's some lovely passes. To the edge. The ones that he'll be disappointed with, the one in the 22 where I'm not sure if he drops it or he gets hit in contact. And then there was an exit in the second half where, we're still in the hunt and he does a lovely wraparound play. And there was just a bit of indecision there. And I think it's Jeg who comes in, makes the tackle, the ball goes forward. And you could see the frustration from Easterby. But he's trying to make something happen. He's given it a go from our own 22. The game is not going well for us. He doesn't necessarily want to go from that part of the field. So yeah, look, it was a tough day, and summed up with the intercept that Ramos makes. Like that's lovely play by Ireland. We have France completely done. Like the only way that can be saved is by a one-handed intercept. That ball ends up on the ground. It's a yellow card, probably a penalty try. But Ramos, there's no pressure on him. Gets his hand to it, pops it up, and it just summed up Prendergast Day. All the effort, but didn't get the results.
And he wasn't alone. I think there was a lot of more senior players who will also be who would be, if you're doing player ratings, will be in and around the same level. And the focus, I think, always goes on the 10, and understandably so. But like Jebson Gibson Park came into the game as one of the best 9s in the world. I don't think he delivered what we expected, partly because France came with a plan to limit what he's going to do. The Ireland captain got run over twice by Miafu in the second half, having had a stormer of a first half. But like a lot of players across the board didn't deliver. The team didn't deliver. And I didn't think he got a lot of help because he didn't have the outballs that he normally has. I think Hansen often comes in first receiver and plays. Ireland weren't able to do that. I think everything had to go through Prendergast. It was like when everything used to go through Sexton, but without the 15 years of experience that Sexton had. And France did target him. So he's never this is Ireland have made a strategic decision to invest heavily in this guy during a tournament, which has backfired because they're not going to win and make history. So the coaches have to own that. But I guess what they're hoping for is that when it comes to 2027, or even when he plays against the All Blacks in Chicago in November, that he's been through this, that he understands what's needed, that he has that little less second. But the risk they took was that they tried to win a three-peat, defend their title, win a Grand Slam with a novice. And when it came to when they came up against a team who are better right now, based on what we saw on Saturday, he wasn't able to deliver on it. And was the project worth it then? Like, as you say, Ireland ultimately relinquished their Six Nations title. You could argue that the best out half play we saw from Ireland was when Jack Crowley played against England for 20 minutes. Like, he looked really, really good. Ireland scored, I think, 3 tries in that period, or 2 anyway, off the top of my head. They've clearly lost faith in Jack Crowley's ability to do it, but it was.
We never really saw him again. No, we didn't see him again at half.
No, we haven't.
For the remainder of the so he played arguably his best 20 minutes for Ireland, and then he was shuffled off stage right to accommodate this project.
And he should have, to me, he should have come on in Murrayfield, and he should have come on at 10 in Cardiff, because I thought one of Ireland's great strengths coming into this tournament was the fact that they would have Prendergast for 60 minutes, and then Crowley comes in and changes the picture, 1-2 punch, delivers a bit of pace. They didn't do that. I think part of it was building towards having a 6-2 against France, so they wanted Crowley to get reps at 15, and obviously the way Cardiff went, Crowley had to come on for Matt Hansen, I remember.
It was at the very end, though. They could have easily brought him on.
He could have come on. No, he could have, but I think they were worried about losing another back to having had the red card. But the points, like Crowley, I think was underutilised in this tournament overall. I see a lot of upside in Sam Prendergast. I thought he was excellent for the large part of the tournament. Saturday didn't go his way. Ireland have never won a World Cup quarter-final. They need to have someone they trust in that position in 2027. But it was a big, big gamble. Look, do you think they would have won the game with Jack Crowley starting? We'll never know. I'm not sure, not so sure based on what he delivered in South Africa against New Zealand. But he did hit form coming into this tournament. But he's at training every day. They're watching these two players command the room, command the meeting room, run the week, all that stuff that we hear about. And they've gone with Prendergast. Ultimately, we are in the post-Johnny Sexton era, and they need to develop a couple of players who are capable of doing this for the long term. This is going to be a battle that runs and runs. But the price is huge, because No, it might be a long time before Ireland put
we seem to have regressed back into the Johnny Sexton era, in that like Sam Prendergast is now being given the same amount of game time that Sexton would have gotten, whereas the England game, as you say, that great 1-2 punch going into the tournament, it seemed to be a great point of difference. We have Prendergast and we have Crowley, and they're different kinds of players, and we can use one guy here and maybe bring Crowley off the bench in this scenario, or maybe mix it up. And by the end of the tournament, it's like we have to give Sam Prendergast every single minute of game time to further his development. And if he doesn't play well, it means that that's like the argument to keep him on more, because he needs the exposure to that tough environment. That was kind of what was spun after Cardiff. Like, the worse he plays, the more he needs the game time, because he needs to learn through that tough moment.
But I think he won the game for them in Cardiff. Like, he helped win the game for them in Cardiff. He kicked all those. I thought he drove that performance. Him and Gibson Park, and drove the team back, kicked the goals to win the game. So that I'm not saying Crowley couldn't have done that, but I think he showed what he's capable of within that game. And I do think that the Aki injury, tied their hands behind their back. Presuming, they never confirmed there was an injury, but Aki definitely wasn't having the influence and was struggling. But I've said all along, I thought Crowley should have had more role in this tournament. I think they should start Crowley next week in Rome, given that he hasn't had the reps. Like, they need both of these. If Prendergast suffers an injury, Jack Crowley's back in for New Zealand in November. So they need to have Crowley getting experience and reps as well. It's been it was a big decision to make, and I'm not laying the whole thing on Prendergast. I'm not saying that they lost the game because of him, but they tried to build his experience while trying to do something special. And the opportunity to win 3 in a row may never present itself again for this group of players. Even a Grand Slam, they're so hard to win. To put yourself for the second year in a row to win your first 3 games and lose your fourth it's a big defeat, and it's a big moment to have that defeat for a group of players who have a fair bit of emotional baggage over the years. So it's going to be a tough one for them to take, and I think they'll look at it, and it's one of the things they will look at.
Just to close off the out-half discussion, Ian, like, what's your perspective on how Ireland have managed it over the course of the tournament? Like, ultimately, with the championship pretty much gone, obviously there's a chance, Scotland could spring a surprise and it could come back on the table. Do you think Ireland have managed it correctly? Is this the way you would have liked to have seen it managed?
I think their hands were tied with certain situations, with players getting injured and how games unfolded, the red card, etc. I'd agree with Rudd. I would like to see Crowley starting against Italy, and that could round off his competition. You'd say, look, I had a good impact against England. I thought he did well when he came on at the weekend. And we talk about his defence. Like, he had a great hold up tackle on Ntamack, which resulted in a maul turnover. And yeah, I think the game at the weekend will have taken a lot out of Sam physically and mentally. I wouldn't call it a dropping. We need 2 good quality out halves, and I'm more than happy to kind of talk about depth in other positions. But if Crowley starts at the weekend, plays well, and Ireland win, you're coming out of the competition going, well, we'd Sam there, we won a Triple Crown, Crowley's come on, shown his worth. We've 2 high quality guys that we could rely on. Plus
a guy who dropped a goal to beat Springboks. So you're looking at real depth coming out of the year. So that's your ups, or out of the kind of last 12 months. So that's your upside. But there's no silverware for that.
That drop goal feels a long time ago now. When it was Frawley, who was the next man in the seat. Ian, the yellow cards generally were such a crucial part of the game, like 15-0 to France during that period, and obviously the Nash one, as we touched on, was kind of like a collision, a split-second kind of collision, but the Joe McCarthy one was very costly, and watching it back more is even more kind of perplexing. I don't know if he thought he was going to get away with that, but it was just one of those moments. And he has had problems with discipline, just kind of maybe not to that degree in such a high-profile moment, but it was a real killer.
Yeah, it was. Like, I'm a massive Joe McCarthy fan, and what he offers with his ball carrying and his defensive work and in the line out, he's been transformational for Ireland since he's come in. But you cannot do pull a player like that back and expect to get away with it. Like, it's a cynical. And it was this clear-cut yellow card, as I've seen. And look, while France only scored once in that time, it's the petrol it takes to cover him while he's off that ultimately bit us in the second half. Because I think we were going in at halftime actually more tired than people realised. We'd played a lot of rugby. We tried to slow the game down on multiple occasions in the first half, which is always a sign that you're looking for a breather, and that's something that Joe McCarthy is going to have to get out of his game. I saw an interview he did during the week where they were talking about a penalty he'd given away in the Welsh game, and I think he made it pretty clear that Paul O'Connell had leaned in on him good and hard over giving it away. And there will be frustration both with him and from himself that he's kind of resorted to doing that. Now, what I would say is, and we touched on it in the Welsh game, there's been multiple times in this competition where Ireland haven't got, like, we're limited with the speed that we have. And with that, it is really important that we get our faster guys defending on the edge. Now, it starts off with Osborne with the exit. Ideally, that ball needs to go off the field, and not even just off it. It needs to go into the second row of the stands so that France can't go quick. But he goes long. It had been a long passage of play leading up to that to Dupont. Dupont fires it in, and you've got 4 fast French guys ready to go. Ireland have to get their fast guys to the edge. Like, Joe McCarthy should not be defending at second last defender inside Nash. Robbie Henshaw's inside him. We need our centres or our out half filling in those second last roles, because it's speed that Joe Mac gets done with. Ramos runs at him square and then skips to the outside, and that gets Biel Barry down the edge. And while Robbie does a great job to scramble back and get the grubber, we didn't have the shape in defence that you need to shut down a counter attack of that speed that the French possess. And the try in the second half is similar.
Did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I just wonder if that's a sign of the fact that Easterby's double jobbing as head coach and defence coach, and the material impact of Andy Farrell not being around for this window. That stuff used to happen in Andy Farrell's first season. I remember over in Paris when Ireland were going for a title and got hammered by a similar enough French team. France attacking out wide, and Ireland's wide defenders were Andrew Porter and Tyke Furlong. And back in that first kind of year of Andy Farrell, where they were still learning the game plan and still adjusting to it, there was loads of really curious moments, either in defence but also in attack, where they'd get run into touch, which ultimately the fruition came when after kind of 18 months of doing it, they turned into a very good team, but they didn't look like it at the time. Like, those are mistakes that Ireland weren't making a year ago. And I think they have come off. I think it's quite clear now that when you look at the 18 months since the World Cup or wherever it's been, they've definitely come off the peak that they were at, and they don't look as organised, both with the ball and without the ball. Certainly across 80 minutes, they're not as consistent across 80 minutes, and they're prone, I think, to having lapses within games, and it's little things like that can cost you so much. But like for Joe McCarthy, like, he's a senior, he's a centrally contracted Ireland player now. He's one of the made men. And if you're one of the made men, I think you've got to stand, and 3 of the guys who've kind of held the baton for so long are stepping off. I'm not saying he becomes a senior player automatically at 23, but he's a player who really can't afford to be making silly errors like that. You'd hope that's the one. Like, it was so costly, you'd hope that's the one that kind of hits home and the message stays.
I'm curious if he plays against Italy this weekend, or if he's turfed out of the squad as kind of like
it won't be. I'd say he might be on the bet. Like, there's a good chance that James Ryan comes in for him. I think that might be a little message. I mean, Andy Farrell's done that before with James Lowe after Twickenham a couple of years ago. It wouldn't surprise me, but I mean, I don't see him getting canned altogether.
Yeah, Ian, just to go back to something you said a minute ago about how you thought that Ireland expended a lot more energy in the first half than maybe was apparent. Like, was there any point, say at half time or even after the Sheehan try, like, did you think Ireland were going to win? Like, did you ever kind of get to that place, or did you always think France had Ireland in a position where they were poised to strike the way they did?
No, look, as a true Irish supporter, when Sheehan went over, I was still thinking today's going to be our day. What I'd say is, and a kind of more holistic way of looking at it, when you've got 2 teams of equal ability, which France and Ireland are, and the results over the last 5 years will show you that it's very close. But when you have your purple patch in a game, you have to get the scores on the board, and we had to work so hard for the 6 points that we got in the first half. France did not have to work particularly hard for that first try. And then you even think of like the first penalty that we get, it was like it was such a Trojan effort to get that 3 points. Will we go to the corner? We probably needed to go to the corner and get a try. And I'm always in favor of taking 3 points and getting scores on the board. But for the momentum that we had in the game, we nearly needed to get 7 points on that occasion. What compounds that is we then after finally getting those 3 points, we do a restart, and Penno buys a penalty. And all the effort we've put in, France have just done a simple kickoff and won a penalty immediately, and they just cancel each other out. And then similarly for Sheehan's try, like, we had to work good and hard for that try. Really well executed maul, great finish from him. But there was no hanging on period after that where you can kind of frustrate France for maybe 5-10 minutes, or get into a kick battle, or, you know, get the ball off the pitch. France just got into their game straight away, and the ease of which they scored that try, where we got the yellow card, and Peter O'Mahony, you know, didn't get rewarded with that penalty. That you're going in behind the post there, going, this is going to be tough now. You know, we've expended a lot of energy, and they've just scored pretty easily. They seem way fresher than we are, and that showed, like, because that 20-minute hot spell that France had, they blew us out of the water with their power game and their speed game.
It was probably similar in terms of time, and France scored 24 points in 15 minutes, and Ireland scored none in the opening, you know, quarter, when they were very much on top. To give, I suppose, not that we haven't given France credit, but to hone in on, you know, the bench obviously was a big talking point before the game. While picking a seventh forward probably didn't work out, considering they had to put.
Jay was a pretty good centre.
He played unbelievable. He had a grubber kick in the second half to put, like, Ireland under all sorts of pressure, and I was like, God, that really just put paid to my narrative of, like, Galtier just really taking a reckless gamble. But the guys that came on, very impactful. Emmanuel Miafu, who people would have seen play for Toulouse quite a bit, his standout international performance by a distance. He was everywhere. He was, like, you know, pulling the ball out the back. He ran over Caelan Doris. He was just generally putting his power to good use. And then obviously the flyers out wide, like Penno linking with Bielbiere for that second try was glorious. And just Bielbiere generally, whenever he got the ball, there was a sense of panic.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Peter O'Mahony, you know, charged him down and was given the benefit of the doubt. You know, Sam Prendergast kind of tugged him back while McCarthy was also pulling back. Like, every time he got the ball, there was panic. He was absolutely electric. But generally, French performers all over the pitch, you know, giving 8, 9 out of 10, I would say.
Yeah, and like, they took Ireland's legs. I like, Andrew Porter's a really good gauge of Ireland's energy, and I thought it was the least energy I've seen from Andrew Porter in a long time, even in the first half. And I guess that's what scrummaging against Weenie Antonio does to you. So the things that we don't pretty appreciate, the mauls, every maul was taking it out of the Ireland forwards. Every scrum was taking it out of the Ireland forwards. So the starters did their job. You know, they defended brilliantly. They struck what, you know, there was a couple of warning signs. There was the early one where Mofana breaks and they got pulled back by a forward pass. There was the Dupont disallowed try. Like, there was, if Ireland make a mistake, they were going to be punished for it in this game. 2 years ago to beat France, I think they made 4 mistakes across the whole game. They made a lot more than that on Saturday. So they were punishing, every collision was punishing, every set piece was punishing, every interaction was punishing. And then if you drop the ball, you make a mistake, you're going to be quite close to being behind your own sticks. It's such a potent kind of mix that France have. And then they have this 7 monsters and Maxime Lucu on the bench. Like, if France, everything went, this will go down, I think, in the annals of French Six Nations performances. To lose their captain and talisman after half an hour, to them, a great injustice. To bring on a guy who had a nightmare in Marseille last year, and for him it was a hugely redemptive performance. To go up against a team who's had your number for the last couple of seasons away from home, and to go with an audacious, like, a 7-1, I think is still an audacious selection, and for it to pay off with such aplomb is amazing. And they, I think, yeah, well, you're looking at an Ireland team who probably delivered 5, 6, 7s out of 10. You're looking at a French team who you've got 8s and 9s across the board, and that's what will piss Ireland off this morning, you know, that they didn't get to the level. They didn't. Now, part of it was because France were so good, but also there was things within their control that they didn't get to. But France did. And if they go on and do what they should do at the weekend and beat Scotland, they should be a Grand Slam team, really. But they are one of the most, certainly the most enjoyable Six Nations teams to watch. And they're worthy winners, because to come to Dublin and do what they did was a phenomenal achievement.
And that second Bielbiere try, like, what a meld of power and kind of panache, like the counter ruck on the left wing, blowing Ireland off the ball and then spinning it wide. And Pinot's pass to Bielbiere, he takes beautifully, and then he still had so much to do. Like, you know, the grubber. And, like, it's funny, Lucu, to be fair to him, almost actually ruins them. They almost get in each other's way, because Lucu's run was so, you know, he was really tracking the play like Dupont would do. And I agree with you. Like, what a day for Maxime Lucu, who probably got the finger pointed by a lot of the French public and supporters last year because he was obviously filling in for the great Antoine Dupont, but thought he was absolutely brilliant. His kicking, he had a lovely little offload for Paul Boudon for that try, and just generally I thought played brilliantly considering the circumstances of him coming in. Ian, like BLBRA, Penno, their pace was so devastating, and it's kind of raised the question about the pace that France have on their team versus maybe Ireland's lack of pace, even like the X Factor players Ireland have. Like James Lowe is really quick, but wouldn't be maybe a BLBRA in terms of pace on the ground. Is that something you think Ireland need to get into their team in any way they can? Like, what's your kind of read on that?
Yeah, like traditionally, Ireland, like we don't have loads of fast players, and we lack on loads of really powerful players, and that's why we play an intricate game where we're trying to create one-on-ones, trying to create soft shoulders, and that's where we get our success. The speed that Penno and BLBRA possess is so much faster than what we do, and like there was a couple of opportunities, even at the very start of the game. Nash does incredibly well, wins that high ball. And when you win a high ball like that, you're attacking against an unstructured defense. It's really golden, and we execute really well. Keenan gets the ball with Osborne outside him. It's a genuine 2v2 with about 20 meters, and you've got Aldred defending Keenan and Penno outside defending Osborne. And Keenan goes for the outside, and he actually gets it. And Osborne just didn't. And this is where it's very difficult coming in playing on the wing. And I'm a huge fan of Osborne, and I think he's going to be a massive part of this Ireland backline going forward. But I'd agree with Rudd. It's probably in the centre. I think 12 is his best position. He's still a very good winger and a very good fullback, but I think we're figuring out that he's going to be most impactful for Leinster and Ireland at 12. But he doesn't quite trust his speed, or doesn't quite trust his instincts. He drops under on a switch, and Keenan gets to Penno, who's the last defender. Had Osborne stayed down the touchline, we are right in behind and probably scoring there. Now, I know it's only on minute 1, but if you compare that to the opportunities that France have with genuine 2v2s, Ramos and BLBRA against Joe McCarthy and Nash, they get on the edge of us. And it's only a yard of speed and difference, but it matters. And then, the telling try in the game when Penno just goes on this run, like he's just eating up the ground, and there's defenders getting crossed off as he's doing it. We don't know whether we're coming or going. We're a very disjointed line, and then BLBRA just pulls out that bit of magic. But again, not only the skill to drop it on his foot, to do it at the speed he's traveling at, and then to re-accelerate away and win the foot race. So look, we do need to try and bring in more speed and more power. And there is speed and power coming. Like you look at the pack, the likes of Boyle coming through. He is a true power athlete. Clarkson to an extent. I know it's at tight head, but that is real quality in the front row. Kelleher, Sheehan, the likes of Tom Stewart, Gus McCarthy, that's a good, powerful front row. I think we've got to fast track the likes of, Ahern, Baird in the pack. And then in the back three, there's not a whole lot of speed that I can think of. Rob Balakoon is the one guy who I've played with that is absolutely rapid, but he's, largely been off the radar for the last 12 months. You look at someone like Tracy for Connacht, he's got real top end speed. Aaron Sexton, Ulster gave him a go, but he wasn't able to break through. And then in the centre, can we get more speed there? Like Ringrose is quick. Can we pair him with someone who's really quick as well? So I think that's going to be something that Ireland are going to have to uncover really quickly. And look, we've got the Italian game and then a more kind of developmental tour coming up. That's where we need to see, the likes of Hugh Gavin, maybe James Hume, and obviously the likes of Ahern, and get an opportunity and see if they can step up to the plate.
Rod, we discussed the speed question before we came on, and you think the IRFU need to make a concerted effort to kind of widen the playing pool and to try to find these kind of athletes? Because as Ian said, it's not as if we can point to 2 or 3 wingers who aren't in the team or aren't involved that we could bring in that would be absolutely rapid, like a BLBRA or anything close to that. So you think it's kind of maybe a medium-term project to kind of try to find people like this?
There's two separate issues. Like you look within your system, what have you got? I think there's in terms of wingers. I think Jacob Stockdale's in the squad. He was injured. I think he impressed in November, and then he got injured that day, and he didn't get back in time. But I think he's still got a big role. He's only 28. He's the same age as James Lowe when he made his Ireland debut. Same with Jordan Larmour. The two players who Ireland invested a lot in and have moved on from, but I think could have a second coming in the medium term. Sorry, in the shorter term, in the next 2 or 3 years, especially if Lowe isn't able to play. I think Stockdale should be number 2 in the depth chart. There are players that Ian's mentioning. Tommy O'Brien is one that they really, really like. Shane Bolton and Connacht is another one that he's more of a power winger, but they like both of those players. The problem is they both keep getting injured whenever they get called up. So it's like O'Brien got a full call up this week. I think if they can get him in July, he has good speed. He's a very good defender as well. But long term, I just think this, like the Irish rugby's place at the top table is such a delicate thing because we're up against South Africa, New Zealand and France, who have 3 of the biggest playing pools, and England are coming. England have 2 really good under-20s teams in a row. England will be back at that top table sooner rather than later, and they have an enormous playing base. Ireland have a really narrow playing base, and with Ulster, Munster and Connacht really underperforming, you're relying on one province to provide most of your players. You're really relying on 4 or 5 schools. It's not diverse enough. It's not athletically diverse enough. It's not genetically diverse enough. It's producing good players, but you're relying on luck. You're relying on Niall Woods coming out of Blackrock or Dennis Hickey coming out of St Mary's. Just a freak. Whereas if you spread your net, if you've sevens being played at an underage level across the country, if you're inviting, so if you're going to look at the sprint championships, or sorry, the European athletics at the moment, the range of athletes that we have in this country. Look at the GA. If you're going to teenagers and saying, come play our game, see what you can do, you're going to find different athletes of different profiles. You're not going to find an Emmanuel Miafu, but you might just find a Louis Beale-Beret who's a sprinter or a really good hurler, but likes having the ball in his hand, who likes playing the game. And then you develop and like that's long-term focus. That's David Humphrey's talk. That's not going to fix Ireland's 2027 World Cup. Like, this is an issue the team is having to mitigate against. But I do think trying to find props and trying to find wingers should be the kind of 2 key focuses of kind of RFU's development programs, but also just improving Munster, Ulster and Connacht so that there's more players available for Andy Farrell to pick, because right now he doesn't think the players in those provinces are good enough. So there's a couple of different strands, and it's just while the national team are kind of dealing with the issues that we're talking about on the top level here, it's David Humphreys and the RFU need to be below the line doing everything they can to make sure that this team stays in this company. I'm not predicting that Ireland will become a Wales or a Scotland overnight, but you have to work so hard to stay at that top table. Right now, if you look at the results against the best 3 teams, the best other 3 teams from the last World Cup, Ireland are heading towards the relegation zone in that company. They've lost more than they've won. They got blown away by one of their rivals. I'm not saying panic stations. I'm not saying they're not going to get back to that level, but they have to be so ruthless in getting in sustaining the success, because it leaves you very quickly.
Relegation zone is
from the top 4. Like you could become a mid-table Six Nations team very, very easily. It could be, they've won 2 in a row and they're going to finish 2nd or 3rd this year. They're losing 3 of their most influential players. They're obviously investing heavily in young out halves. France are getting better. I expect England to get better. Next year's going to be just as tough. They've got to go away again. That's 2 years in a row. It just, we've got a November where they play New Zealand and South Africa. They lose both of those games. It just it can leave you very quickly. I'm not predicting that it will, but I just think that Andy Farrell needs to be like really. I mean, he is. I know he is honed in on this, and the RFU below the line need to be making sure that like Clayton McMillan's success in Munster, that Ulster turn things around under Richie Murphy, because the better those teams are, the better Ireland are going to be.
One thing, just to add to the wingers and the development of wingers, one thing that did stand out about the success the under-20s have had over the last number of years is not many of those teams had like wingers that would be in the top 2 or 3 players. It was like, Brian Gleeson in the back row. It was, you had Scott Penny on a Grand Slam winning team who was a key guy there. Ryan Baird in that team and a few other guys in different positions, but not really producing like out and out wingers who you're going to be like, that guy will play for Munster, Leinster, Ulster, Connacht and ascend to the national team. It was kind of elsewhere in those teams where the strengths lied. So that's one thing you would have hoped over that period where Ireland have won 2 Grand Slams and another Six Nations title, that might have produced 1 or 2, but it doesn't seem to be the case at this juncture. Ian, I'm conscious we actually didn't really reflect on the Dupont incident. I know kind of jumping a bit all over the place here, but it was such a key moment in the game, and obviously the reaction with Fabien Galthie accusing Tyber and Andrew Porter of a reprehensible act. It was cleared by Angus Gardner and the TMO at the time, and then cleared by the deciding commissioner as well. Like, what's your perspective on what, looking at the replays, appears to just be an unfortunate accident? I know it's not being taken like that in all quarters.
Yeah, look, really, really upsetting, and you never seeing a player getting injured, and especially not when it's someone like Dupont. But it was exactly as described by Angus Gardner. It was a rugby incident. Tig and Andrew are really clean players. There's never been any incident in their combined 20+ year career where they've intentionally tried to hurt someone here. It's also near impossible to do that. You're going at high speed. Their only focus is clearing Dupont out from the ruck, and unfortunately his leg gets trapped, and that results in the mechanism of him doing his ACL. So yeah, look, just really tough situation, but look, there's nothing more in that, and it was a bit disappointing hearing the French speaking about it that way. I think they're probably just being clouded by how upset they were for Dupont.
You were there, I presume, when Galtier was speaking?
No, I was actually in another room interviewing Ireland players, but the word got around fairly quickly. It's very unusual. Was it
in English or French? Presumably French.
French, yeah. But it's so, I'd say it was a fairly sour post-match dinner, because it's so unusual for a coach to, in this day and age, to refer an opposition player to the deciding commissioner. The teams have kind of left that to the deciding commissioner himself. We used to have an era a long time ago where you'd have sightings and counter sightings and tit for tat stuff, and that's kind of been gone. So look, it's Antoine Dupont. He means more in France than nearly any player does to any other country, and you can kind of understand that. And Galtier was in a bit of a mood all week. He put pressure on Gardner beforehand. But he
came down to the touchline right where I was sitting before the end of the first half, and it reminded me of that Michael Scott meme when he's telling everyone to stay calm. Like, he was kind of marching around, he was getting very vocal, and at that stage, that's why I was like, oh, France are done. And then it seemed to spark something, to be fair.
Yeah, well, he was under, France were a team under tremendous pressure, and I thought, because I was one of the people that tipped Ireland, I thought that pressure might weigh heavily on them, but it brought the best out in them. His job was on the line in many ways, and his team really played for him. But I personally, look, he's upset that his player got injured. But even to go after Nash, who was reviewed in the bunker and stayed a yellow, and to cite him, to me is pretty sour grapes from a winning coach. I thought it was poor enough to do, and it was misplaced. Rucks are dangerous places, and jackals are dangerous. There's possibility it was a penalty against Byrne, because there's no. He leads with the shoulder, but to say that it's an act of foul play, an act of malice to go out and to hurt Dupont, I just don't see that.
As you said, I think that you tweeted or maybe write in a piece, like Byrne and Porter, next time they go to France to play a match, I don't think they're going to be very popular. Yeah,
I mean, it does damage their reputations. Like, they're now personas non grata in France, and that's a big consequence of what Galtier has gone and done, because and in South Africa as well, for some reasons, our South African friends have rode in behind the French on this, if you go on social media, which is pretty ill-advised. But I thought it was poorly done by Galtier. There's ways you can refer it without making it public. You can kind of point them in that direction, but to come out publicly and accuse two players of an act of foul play for something that quite clearly to me was an accident was very unfair.
I guess Dupont is just such a talisman for not just the team, the country, that there's a huge degree of emotion, I'd imagine. Even him coming off the pitch, like he was devastated, which is understandable given the nature of the injury. Ian, just before we kind of wrap up, is there anything else from the game, tactically, talking point wise, do you think is worth honing in on?
No, look, full credit to the French. Like, they were on a going day, and look, to see them live, and the flick pass from Dupont, Peno going on these mazy runs, the finish from Biel Barry,
the cross kick from Biel Barry. God, we didn't even mention that on his own line.
Yeah, like everyone just kind of chuckled to themselves in the stadium when that happened, and like, so French, but we kind of love it in a way as well, especially when it doesn't work out. But yeah, look, full credit to the French. Even like that's the skill and the speed side, like the power that they showed. Roy touched on it, the likes of Miafu coming on. That they just They just got it right on the day, and full credit to them. I hope they go on and win it. They were unlucky against England. It just like catching passes and whatnot, but they've been the best side in the competition for me.
So, Ian, do you look at the defeat, like, would this make you worried for the medium term for Ireland, or do you look at it as a day where France hit their straps, played great rugby, and then Ireland were missing, Lowe, Hansen, Ringrose, Furlong, Kelleher, and with those guys back in it, Ireland should resume their place as a top 4 team competing with the best, or is it warning signs for you?
No, I think you'd be naive not to think that there are some warning signs, and we have to build out our depth in key positions, and I thought the toll of playing 80 minutes consistently for some guys began to catch up with them on against France. The likes of Van der Fleer, Porter, Tyburn. They still had good games, and they put themselves about. But they weren't as fresh as what we've seen earlier in the season. And then we've got to build our depth out in the centre and in the wing, and even at number 7. Like if Josh was unavailable last week, who would have stepped in? We haven't really built out depth at number 7. So yeah, look, I'd be in favour of changing up the team significantly for the Italian game, and then the tour itself, with a lot of the guys going away on the Lions tour, is going to be developmental, and we'll see a lot of guys step up. But November's going to roll around quickly for this team, and we're going to be playing 2 of the best teams in the world then.
Yeah, Rud, you're going to be in Rome, obviously, on Saturday. It'll be a strange day in the sense that Ireland play first up at 2:15, and theoretically we'll have to be on standby to lift the Six Nations trophy, at least until the England game, because they'll know by then if they're knocked out of second position. It could go on until 11 o'clock at night. So it'll be a long working day for you, but it's going to be a strange day generally.
Yeah, we've booked a restaurant with a TV, so we've got all bases covered. I think the mission in Rome is just to bounce back. That was a defeat that could have lingering consequences. The last time Ireland lost that heavily at home was against England in 2019, and that hangover lasted nearly 2 years. So they don't want, like Joe Schmidt at that time said a couple of weeks later, that Ireland were a bit broken by that England game, and you don't want this to be a defeat that breaks Ireland, because they should be stronger than that now. They're moving towards having a much better age profile with the 3 players moving on. They've obviously got Doris as captain now. They've got 2 young 10s. They've got Sheehan as a vice captain. This is looking like a new team now. By the time they come back against New Zealand and Chicago, it will be a new team. It will be very much, I think, a 2027 focused team. This is the point at which Farrell, I think, always planned to throw forward, and it was in the second half of the cycle last time that Ireland had their greatest success. So you're banking on the head coach to do it. And Rome, to me, is the start of that. So the championship, to me, is gone. Just the Grand Slam, all that is gone. The 3 great players have said goodbye. I think bring them to Rome, but I wouldn't play them in Rome. Maybe you put 1 or 2 of them on the bench based on what options you have elsewhere, but I certainly think Jack Boyle could do with the minutes. And what better way to sign off than a lap of honour at home? Really, do you need an extra cap against Italy away? I don't know, maybe they do. Maybe I'm built differently to them. But I also think stuff like 50-50s, give Osborne a go in the centre, or at least put him in 23 and give him some time in his familiar position. If there's a 50-50, go with the player who's going to be there in November. Because I think now the focus is on, you've got to rebuild that proud home record. Teams are going to look at you as being far more vulnerable now. They've seen you being overpowered and out-muscled. Pretty important Leinster go and win this Champions Cup this year. They've got the big difference they've got RG Snyman and Geordie Barrett to help, and Rabah Slimani. These players need a big win. The team needs to build that belief back. So I think this is going to be a pretty pivotal year in the development of this team in the Andy Farrell era. I think a lot of them will still go on the Lions, so that will be a chance for them to have a big experience, to build on what they've got, and then you got that layer beneath. But it could be a very damaging day. We just don't know. We can't make that judgment until we see what comes next, and that begins next Saturday.
And we might get, as you say, another litmus test in the Champions Cup in Ireland versus France clash to come in a couple of weeks' time. But for now, Rud, Ian, thanks so much for joining me.